metal's possibilities are, as we know, endless. While some people may paint us headbangers as narrow-minded when it comes to accepting different types of music, it's important to remember how open a playing field metal on the whole really is. As new styles emerged in the 80s, thrash's increasing extremity gave way to death metal, which retooled everything previously figured to be possible within the realm of heavy metal. Decades later, the question remains, who really invented death metal? Before we even get to that whole possessed versus death argument, we have to establish the difference between thrash and death metal. Remember, when this all started, there was no nice, neat dividing line where anyone could simply slap a genre tag on a band and be done with it. So who exactly laid the foundation for death metal in the first place? On a wider level, a lot of emphasis gets placed on one groundbreaking record in particular, with some others not quite far behind.
I feel like Rain and Blood definitely established a blueprint. I think it was, I think there were some other acts kind of doing a parallel sound at the time, like getting more extreme. I think thrash was like constantly getting more extreme at the time. But I think that's the one that blew the doors open for everybody and kind of like set the standard of how fast you could go, man, how intense it could be.
There was a lot of stuff going on at the time. Sacrifice, you know, Dark Angels, Darkness Ascends is also like, I think even more heavier and brutal and more of a death metal blueprint than even Rain and Blood. But from a more popular standpoint, you know, to have Slayer release that album at that time on a major label was very important.
I mean, to me, I guess Rain and Blood, like the only thing that's missing from what you would call death metal, I guess, to me is really just the vocal style. I mean, all the ugly dissonant harmonies and things are there, and it's ferocious and fast, and it's really not far off.
Now let's get this straight. I am not claiming that Slayer invented death metal. I don't think anyone has, and I'm not going to be the first. But listen to those early Cannibal Corpse records and try telling me there's not a whole lot of Slayer in there. Like Jason Netherton alluded to, Rain and Blood wasn't the one singular record that thrust death metal into existence. It was a community effort, as thrash was getting extreme in every way possible in Slayer's own backyard, as well as overseas. The lyrical content was dark, violent. Vocalists were delivering serrated, snarling vocal attacks that actually sounded like someone was being murdered. And drummers, they were pushing their bodies to uncharted limits.
Yeah, I think that people just started doing the hot beat so fast at the time, and everyone was just like trying to be like so intense, and the bar kept going up, and eventually it's like a blast beat, pretty much.
Yeah, if you play a thrash beat fast enough, it's a blast beat, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, fine, maybe some jazz drummers invented the blast beat, whatever. But nobody really gave a damn until former Napalm Death drummer Mick Harris popularized it, as did Morbid Angel and Terrorizer legend Pete Sandoval, who wielded astonishing control over those rapid double kicks, too.
10-year-old me hearing, Covenant or Altars of Madness for the first time, it was just like, you already knew the extreme of like, Dave Lombardo and even Lars, on, say, And Justice for All. It was like, then you heard Pete Sandoval, and it was like, whoa, like this is next level craziness, That's the foundation for the blast. It doesn't get much more extreme than that early in those days.
Now here's where it gets interesting. All this talk about Slayer, Rain and Blood, 1986, you're sitting there thinking, but Joe, haven't you seen the footage of Morbid Angel playing Chapel of Ghouls, a certified death metal anthem, in 1986? Yes, I have. I'm probably responsible for like half the views on that video. But if you haven't seen it, well, here you go. Enjoy.
So in the American scene, that happened with the record labels when they put out the Grind Crusher compilation. That's the first time I heard Morbid Angel, Chapel of Ghouls. I was like, my God.
So that answers the big question, right? Morbid Angel. Hooray! No! Remember that weird genre label thing I was talking about? Trevor, back me up here, dude.
Genre tags were so much more broad back then. You had, I think, a lot of like dark thrash stuff even being called black metal at the time. Really anything satanic kind of went under that umbrella, I feel like, in the early days of like genre tags and stuff.
Thank you. I know if you won't listen to me, you'll at least bow to Papa Trev. So we went through the blast beats, which the Swedes mostly didn't even use in their death metal, neither did Obituary. There's the vocal style, which kind of speaks for itself. You had Cam Lee and the Death prototype Mantis, and all those hugely influential Death demos, which got circulated around the world through tape trading, and it had this manic vocal delivery, as plenty of other budding death metal groups took cues from him, as well as the German thrashers. But what about the riffs? What separates thrash from death metal? Thrash is stompy. There's a lot of sliding power chords and that punk energy. But death metal?
One of the distinguishing factors for me is really just kind of like the chunkiness of death metal. I feel like that's like different than thrash, like the meat of it. Playing it.
I guess there's kind of a down-tuning element too that comes into play, where I guess I expect death metal to be tuned lower than thrash metal.
There we go. You can hear those scooping riffs come into play back in '84 on Slayer's At Dawn They Sleep. That choppy groove death metal rides so well was heard in Hellhammer too, which later morphed into Celtic Frost, or Celtic Frost, depending on who you ask. Matt Pike will tell you what's up in a minute, as main man Tom G. Warrior forever changed the game.
His guitar always sounded like a half-cocked wah, but he has like a secret thing. I'm not gonna give that away. I know what it is though. Listen to High on Fire. A lot of my riffs are Sabbath-based, but they're also very Celtic Frost-based. They're very chromatic, and I slide all over the place. Tom G was the first one to like kind of go crazy with that, you know, just take risks. And I think half the time he probably didn't even know how cool he was being, just doing his thing, you know. I don't think he had fully like developed what he was doing. I think he was just experimentally going apeshit. And at a certain point it just worked. Ooh! Who doesn't like that? Makes the riff heavier right off the bat.
With those parameters loosely defined, we could spend another hour going over semantics, but as long as you don't call them Cookie Monster vocals, we can just move along here, right? Alright, good. Now we're in the proper spot to assess the old Possessed Seven Churches versus Death's Scream Bloody Gore argument. Or maybe there's another contender.
Possessed is very much the forerunner. I think that the first Possessed, you know, leading up to Death, and there's other ones too, more underground, like Necrovore from Texas. As far as like the one that separates, it's really hard to say, because I could make a case for Dark Angel. Again, Dark Angel, Darkness Ascends. That's like very close to a death metal record.
Death is one of the more obvious, I mean, just they're called Death, but you know, one of the more obvious death metal bands that really, you know, helped kick things off into the evolution of what we know of death metal ever since, really. You know, you can go back and be like, yeah, it was Possessed, and you know, Sadus and these other bands.
There's like a lot of like death thrash bands, you could say, you know, that kind of came down the pipes after that. Demolition Hammer, Dark Angel is pretty extreme, I would say. Some people say Possessed is the OG death metal band, but it's really just extreme thrash.
If Possessed were really just extreme thrash, why do they get lumped into the death metal conversation? What makes Seven Churches a possible death metal record? For one, if you write a song called death metal, and you're the first to ever use that term, whatever you say is death metal is death metal. It's the Venom black metal rule. Caveat there, though, is Venom's definition of black metal didn't really stick around, and it got applied to something quite a bit different. Possessed, though, are a lot closer to Death than Morbid Angel than Venom were to Dark Throne and Mayhem, so that's where this gets a little tough. Jeff Becerra's tortured, scratchy vocal style echoed throughout early death metal. It's that sound. Sorry, nobody's really made a word for that yet. But it was different from the machine gun style common in the Bay Area, and unlike some of the unhinged German thrash vocalists, Becerra had this strange, strong sense of dominance and control. He almost sounded relaxed, and it's that imposing quality of being so in command of something so utterly chaotic that was felt elsewhere in early death metal, even down to the calculated slop of something like Autopsy. Still, there's quite a bit of that debut record that's certifiably thrashy, and Seven Churches is, at the very least, the absolute missing link between thrash and death metal. Casting demos aside and sticking with official releases on our timeline here, it was Chuck Schuldiner and Death who were the first to really sever those ties between thrash and this new style a bunch of kids were inventing.
To put it down to one record, I guess you could just look at a release date and say maybe Scream Bloody Gore by Death. That would be that is the death metal record, you know, undeniably.
Scream Bloody Gore had that chunky riffing quality Trevor Stern had touched on. Chuck Schuldiner, he sounded like he was being eviscerated, and even the speed picking aspects were so deeply sinister, there was simply nothing comparable. Possessed? You could tie them right into Creator and Dark Angel, but with Death, the only way to look was forward. That went for the genre on the whole and the band itself, who constantly reinvented the style as time and albums went on.
Chuck Schuldiner is still my favorite to this day. It's hard to choose between, Human, but it was Spiritual Healing that actually got me into death metal, and I heard them before I ever even heard Slayer. I bought the cassette and took it home and was just enamored by it. I remember thinking it was weird that the cover was so colorful, yet the music was so dark. I liked that, stark, drastic contrast.
My death album was Leprosy. And then by the time Spiritual Healing came out, I thought it was a bit too slick in my taste. Which is odd. My taste in death metal has nothing to do with how we sounded or sound, I don't want that. My death metal has to be raw and dirty and not clean and ugly shit, I like that precision of Morbid Angel, I do, but that's about it, Otherwise, I want it to be pig sounding.
When you're a 15-year-old kid and you hear a guy go, "Some say she's naive, she's a stupid bitch," we cracked up, we laughed and thought it was funny, but then we also looked into what he's talking about, and it was just oh, there's actually a politically conscious dude here, and it's actually not just bullshit. And I was able to go and explain that to my parents, And then comes Cannibal Corpse, and how the hell do you explain that?
I don't know, man. You're on your own with that one.